Dave, good morning to you. So what sort of a strategic asset can this be if the nuclear submarines aren't even here until some 15, 20 years?
Well, Peter, we don't know when they'll be here yet. Peter Dutton foreshadowed yesterday that a decision that was initially due to be taken within 18 months about what the pathway would be proceeding will be taken within the next few months. So we're already moving through this quicker than we expect. But I just point out, whatever future class of submarine we were going to get was not going to be here until sometime in the 2030s at least. And it's more important that I think we get the capability right here than we rush a decision and get something that won't serve us well for our future strategic needs.
Back to Ukraine, is there any chance, in your view, of a no-fly zone being imposed?
Look, a no-fly zone is it's like a blockade in the sense that it's akin to an act of war or an act of aggression. So a no-fly zone would be a significant escalation from NATO and the West. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but I would just point out the fact that up until now they've indicated they have no intent to get directly militarily involved. Well, a no-fly zone almost requires that, because you can't just declare a no-fly zone and then not enforce it. And to enforce it, you need a lot of anti-aircraft assets. You need your own fighter aircraft in the area to make sure that people don't violate the no-fly zone.
Yeah.
That would almost certainly bring them into conflict with the Russian Air Force.
And it would be alarming what that would lead to, because obviously you would then be killing Russian soldiers. That could lead to Vladimir Putin then pulling the trigger on nuclear weapons, and you've got a much bigger war in Europe, right?
Look, it would be a significant escalation. You can never entirely predict how these things will play out, but it would be raising the tension. It does raise the risk of a direct conflict between NATO and Russian forces, and the risk of escalation that would follow from that. That said, though, I think it is very important that we do deter Putin's ongoing aggression against Ukraine, and we do take other steps, including arming the Ukrainian military, to make sure that Putin's aggression is not seen to have paid a reward.
Do you buy the commentary that something like a no-fly zone, if imposed correctly, could lead to something akin to World War III?
Look, I think, anytime you escalate a conflict, it can go two ways, right? It can deter the other side, it can deter the adversary, or it can cause them to respond in turn. That's the nature of conflict. It's the nature of war. It's unpredictable and it's a risky endeavour. But you could point to any number of things. If US military presence on the ground in Ukraine, if they hadn't been withdrawn, if they'd been hit, well, perhaps that would have led to an escalation of conflict as well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's particularly helpful to go around, saying what these scenarios will lead to. A no-fly option is an option that's been used in the past with Saddam Hussein's Iraq, but we're talking about vastly different situations and vastly different historical contexts. From what I'm aware, this is not a proposal that is seriously being considered, and I would hasten to add, this is not something Australia would be involved in. This would be a NATO and US operation.
It would be our NATO partners, yeah. But something that may concern us does concern us is the closer relationship between Putin and Xi, President Xi. Do you believe that he would be emboldened at the moment to make a move on Taiwan, perhaps earlier than anyone thought?
Look, I'm sure decision makers in Beijing are watching developments in Ukraine very closely and watching the international system's reaction to that. But I would think the jury would still be out there about what this means. There's a few things to note here. Firstly, Russia has gone and violated the independence and territorial integrity and sovereignty of another sovereign country. And that is a feature of the international system that China cherishes very deeply, the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of other sovereign nations. So inside, at least, they will not be particularly comfortable with what Russia is doing here. I think they'll also be watching the quite severe financial and economic sanctions that have been imposed upon Moscow, including freezing their central bank assets, cutting them out of SWIFT, a number of other things, and the domestic pressure that's putting on Putin. And I think they'll be watching that and, taking lessons from that too. So I think it's a little too early to draw conclusions about what lessons other major powers will be taking from this conflict. It's still a work in progress, but I think that's why it's very important, from my perspective, that NATO and the Western countries more broadly are seen to respond very forcefully and very decisively to Russian aggression.
Yeah. Sometimes it pays to listen to what dictators have got to say. I mean, you've got Putin, who outlined all of this in his essay last year, and President Xi basically did the same thing with the CCP centenary, where reunification was a big part of his goal. Is it inevitable that he's going to go for it?
Well, I think it's inevitable that it's their desire to do this, and I don't think that's any great surprise. They've been saying this in speeches for decades. But having the desire to do something and having the capability to do it are two quite different situations. And I think the fact that the United States sent a very high-level delegation to Taiwan just last week, I think should show people that Taiwan is in a different category here to Ukraine. It doesn't mean that the people are any more or less deserving of protection, but in terms of US strategic interests and what a conflict would look like, Taiwan would not be a repeat of Ukraine in any sense. I think the involvement of outside powers would be significantly larger, and the military operation would be significantly more difficult as well.
Okay. Dave Sharma, good to chat as always. Talk to you soon.